All right. So we're diving deep today into the whole global affairs situation. And I think it's safe to say it's a pretty complicated one.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack for sure.
We're going to try to like untangle what's going on with this war in Ukraine and like what it means for, the global landscape and obviously what it all means for President Trump.
Yeah. And, it's interesting looking back at how we even got here, right? Like history is it's full of these moments, these like turning points that if things had gone just a little bit differently, the whole, trajectory could have changed.
Like those sliding doors moments.
Exactly. And in this case, I mean, there were actually opportunities to maybe even prevent the conflict in Ukraine altogether.
Oh, wow. Really? Like even before the war actually started?
Oh, yeah. Before the first shots were even fired.
So you're talking about those missed chances for peace
Yep.
that
Yeah.
everyone talks about, like the Minsk agreements, right?
Exactly. So those agreements were signed back in 2015, and they were supposed to bring an end to the fighting that was already happening in eastern Ukraine. They laid out a roadmap for, political autonomy for the Donbas region and protections for the Russian-speaking population there.
Right.
And everyone involved, the Russians, the French, the Germans, the Ukrainians, they all agreed to it.
Right. So everyone signed on the dotted line. So what happened?
Well, looking back, it seems like some of the key Western players maybe weren't fully committed to, actually implementing the agreements.
So it's like they signed it, but with their fingers crossed behind their backs.
Yeah, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's come out that leaders like Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande, who were instrumental in getting those agreements signed, they later admitted that they saw Minsk more as a way to buy time for Ukraine to build up its defenses.
So not as like a lasting solution.
Right. And a really crucial part of the agreement, which involved Ukraine changing its constitution to grant autonomy to the Donbas, well, that never even happened.
Oh, wow. The Ukrainian side just ignored it.
Yeah, basically.
So you've got this peace agreement, and a key part of it is just completely ignored. No wonder things kept escalating.
Yeah, it definitely didn't help.
And then, of course, there's the whole issue of NATO expansion, which has always been a major sorting point for Russia.
Oh, yeah, that was huge. The possibility of Ukraine joining NATO was like this constant, threat in Russia's eyes.
Yeah.
They saw it as a direct threat to their security. I mean, it would essentially bring a hostile military alliance right up to their border.
Right to their doorstep.
Exactly. And the Minsk agreements didn't address NATO expansion at all, which, looking back, seems like a missed opportunity to, maybe ease some of Russia's concerns.
Right, because ignoring those concerns just made things worse.
Yeah, it definitely poured fuel on the fire.
And then in 2021, Zelensky signed that law aiming to retake all the temporarily occupied territories. And he specifically mentioned Crimea.
Right.
That seems like a pretty clear red line for Putin.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Crimea, that's a whole other layer of complexity in this whole situation, right?
Yeah, Crimea is a big deal. Why is it such a flashpoint for Russia?
Well, for one thing, Crimea's history is really deeply tied to Russia's. It was part of the Russian Empire for centuries. And even after Khrushchev transferred it to Ukraine in 1954.
Right, that was in like the 50s.
Yeah, 1954. Even after that, the majority of the population remained ethnically Russian.
So it was more like an internal Soviet thing than an actual separation.
Right. And then when Ukraine became independent in 1991, Crimea stayed part of it, but the question of its status never really went away.
It was always simmering under the surface.
Exactly. And then came 2014. After all the political turmoil in Ukraine, Russia moved quickly to annex Crimea. They held a referendum, and there's debate about how legitimate it was, but the outcome was overwhelmingly in favor of joining Russia.
So Putin saw an opportunity and took it.
Yeah, and it's clear that Crimea holds a lot of strategic value for Russia.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet.
Exactly. It gives them a critical naval presence in the region. Controlling Crimea strengthens their security and their ability to, project power.
Right.
So for Putin, any talk of taking back Crimea is totally unacceptable.
So Zelensky's 2021 declaration about retaking those territories, including Crimea, it was basically throwing a match onto a pile of tinder.
Yeah, pretty much. And then you've got the Biden administration coming in with their stated goal of weakening Russia, which honestly might have backfired in some ways.
Yeah, how so?
Well, it seems like it actually pushed Russia closer to China, Iran, and North Korea.
Oh, wow. So it like strengthened those alliances.
Exactly. And that creates a much more complicated geopolitical landscape.
Right.
It seems like they were so focused on punishing Russia that they didn't really think about the bigger picture.
And of course, we can't forget about the devastating impact this conflict has had on Ukraine itself.
Yeah, the human cost is just staggering.
Yeah.
We're talking countless casualties, millions of people displaced from their homes, cities completely destroyed. Ukraine's infrastructure is in ruins, their economy is shattered, and their military is severely weakened.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking to see the toll this war has taken on a nation caught in the middle of these global power struggles.
Absolutely. And now President Trump faces the really difficult task of navigating this incredibly complex situation. You have Ukraine fighting for its survival, Russia pursuing its security interests and trying to expand its influence, and the United States with its own strategic interests to consider.
It's a high-stakes game with really high stakes. So what are President Trump's options here?
Well, negotiating a settlement seems like the most likely way to resolve this conflict. But getting to that point is going to be tough. It'll require some difficult choices and a willingness to acknowledge the new geopolitical reality that's emerged from this war.
So we can't just cling to the way things were before the war.
Right. We have to recognize that things have fundamentally changed. Russia's alliances are stronger, and Ukraine is in a much weaker position.
Okay, so those are things we have to keep in mind moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And rebuilding some kind of working relationship with Russia is going to be crucial. It won't be easy or quick, but it's necessary to stabilize the situation and prevent things from escalating further. But, on top of all of that, there are serious questions about whether the U.S. military is even ready for a potential conflict with a major power like Russia or China.
You're saying our military might not be as prepared as we think.
Well, decades of focusing mainly on counterinsurgency operations in the Middle East has taken a toll.
Yeah.
Our military readiness has eroded, and we've become way too reliant on technology. And the vulnerabilities of that approach have been exposed by how effective drones have been in the Ukraine conflict.
So even though we have these really advanced weapon systems, if our strategy and training haven't kept up, then that technological edge doesn't mean much.
Exactly. We've poured tons of resources into these legacy platforms like aircraft carriers, which are becoming more and more vulnerable in this era of hypersonic missiles and sophisticated drone attacks.
Right.
We need to adapt, rethink our military doctrine, and really prioritize developing next-generation weapons systems.
We can't just rely on the victories of the past. The world is changing, and our military has to change with it.
Absolutely. And there's another really troubling issue that needs to be addressed, and that's the lack of accountability within the Pentagon.
You mean like people not being held responsible for their actions?
Yeah, exactly. We've seen this culture develop where conformity and obedience to the regime are rewarded, but incompetence and failure are rarely punished.
So it's more about towing the party line than about actually getting results.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And the disastrous policies in Ukraine are a prime example of this. We need to hold the people responsible for these mistakes accountable. We need leaders who prioritize results over rhetoric leaders who are willing to challenge the status quo and make tough decisions.
It's about putting America's interests first, not clinging to outdated ideologies or catering to special interests.
Exactly. We need a clear-eyed assessment of the threats we face and a coherent strategy to address them effectively.
That makes sense.
We need a combination of strength and wisdom, knowing when to fight and when to negotiate, when to build alliances, and when to stand firm.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, but an important one.
It's absolutely necessary if we want to navigate the turbulent waters of the 21st century.
This has been a really insightful discussion, but we've only just scratched the surface of this really complex topic.
Yeah.
It looks like we're going to have to continue this deep dive in our next episode. Until then, keep those brain cells firing.
Yeah, for sure. And, while we've been busy with these long wars in the Middle East, our adversaries have been watching us, studying our tactics,
Taking notes?
Yeah, exactly. They're seeing our weaknesses, figuring out how to counter us, and they've been adjusting their own strategies.
So it's like we've been stuck playing checkers while they're playing chess.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Look at Russia, for example. They've really modernized their military in recent years.
How so?
Well, they've invested a lot in hypersonic missiles. Those things are incredibly fast and maneuverable.
Yeah, I've heard about those. They're like impossible to intercept, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And they've also been developing advanced electronic warfare capabilities. That means they can disrupt our communication and radar systems.
Oh, wow. So they can basically blind us.
In a sense, yeah. And of course, they're also boosting their cyber warfare capabilities, which is a huge threat to our critical infrastructure. These are all areas where we've fallen behind.
It's like we got complacent thinking our tech would always be the best. But just having the best weapons doesn't guarantee victory, right?
No, not at all. You need highly trained, well-equipped, and motivated troops to actually use those weapons effectively. And that's where I start to get worried.
How so?
Well, years of deployments have really stretched our military thin, and our training has become too focused on counterinsurgency warfare, the kind of irregular warfare we've been fighting in the Middle East.
So we're trying to fight tomorrow's wars with yesterday's tactics.
Yeah, basically. And we're up against adversaries who've been studying our playbook and coming up with ways to beat us.
Not good.
No, it's not. And another thing that worries me is this erosion of standards within the military.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in the name of diversity and inclusion, we've lowered the bar for entry and promotion, and that's had a negative impact on combat effectiveness.
That seems kind of counterproductive. Don't we want our armed forces to be the best of the best?
Exactly. When it comes to national security, we need the most qualified people, period. Compromising standards puts our national security at risk.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's the whole issue of woke ideology.
Oh, yeah. That's been a big topic of conversation lately.
This focus on identity politics has seeped into the military, and it's really starting to erode unit cohesion. It's distracting from the core mission of warfighting.
So instead of focusing on how to win wars, we're getting bogged down in social and cultural issues.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a dangerous distraction. We need a military that's laser focused on winning wars, not on social engineering.
So how do we fix this? How do we get back to having a military that's ready to face the challenges of the 21st century?
Well, it starts with leadership. We need leaders who are willing to admit there's a problem and make tough choices, even if they're unpopular. They need to prioritize combat effectiveness above all else.
Putting the mission first.
Exactly. We need to get back to basics, rigorous training, realistic scenarios, and a relentless focus on winning. We need a military that our adversaries fear and respect, not one that they see as weak or distracted.
A force to be reckoned with.
Exactly. And that means investing in the right capabilities. We need to be honest about the limitations of our legacy systems, like aircraft carriers, and really focus on developing next-generation weapons systems.
Like what?
Like hypersonic missiles, directed energy weapons, advanced drones with greater autonomy and range cyber warfare capabilities to defend our networks and attack theirs, and robust space-based assets like satellites for surveillance and communication.
So we need to be on the cutting edge, anticipating future threats, not clinging to the weapons of the past.
Exactly. We also need to foster a culture of accountability in the military. Reward competence, punish failure.
Regardless of rank or connections.
Exactly. We need a meritocracy where the best and brightest rise to the top. We need a military that's ready to fight and win, not one that's bogged down in bureaucracy, political correctness, or complacency.
And we can't forget about the importance of intelligence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, having good intel is crucial in modern warfare.
Absolutely. We need accurate, timely, and actionable intelligence so we can make informed decisions.
So it's not just about having the best weapons, it's also about knowing what the enemy is doing.
Precisely. And that's where I have some concerns about the politicization of our intelligence agencies. Well, there have been instances where intelligence has been manipulated or suppressed to fit a particular narrative.
To make things look a certain way.
Yeah, basically. And that's dangerous.
Yeah.
We need intelligence professionals who are dedicated to providing objective assessments free from political bias. Policymakers need the truth, even if it's uncomfortable.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Exactly. And we also can't forget about the dangers of disinformation and propaganda. Our adversaries are really good at using these tactics to sow discord, undermine our institutions, and influence public opinion.
It's a whole new battleground, isn't it? We're not just fighting on land, sea, and air, but also in the information space.
Exactly. We need to be smart about the information we consume. We need to be able to tell fact from fiction and recognize propaganda when we see it.
Develop those media literacy skills.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of corruption, which weakens our national security from the inside. We've seen examples of waste, fraud, and abuse in the defense industry and within the government itself.
So it's not just about external threats, but also about problems within our own system.
Exactly. Corruption erodes public trust, weakens our institutions, and diverts resources away from crucial national security priorities.
It's like a cancer that we need to cut out.
We need to root out corruption wherever we find it, hold those responsible accountable, and create a more transparent and accountable system. It's about integrity, ethical leadership, and putting the nation's interests above personal gain.
Right. So it all comes back to accountability. We've seen so much incompetence and failure within the government, and yet there are rarely any consequences for those in charge.
It's like they're playing a game where they can make terrible decisions and never have to pay the price.
And that's a big problem.
It is. We need a system that actually holds people accountable for their actions. Reward competence, punish failure. No more getting away with bad decisions. We need to demand better from our leaders.
Hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah, and make sure they're actually serving the interests of the American people. It's about restoring trust in our institutions and having faith that those in power are actually working for us. And, we also need to remember the importance of diplomacy.
Right. We can't just rely on military force all the time.
Exactly. We need to engage with our adversaries, try to understand their perspectives, and find ways to resolve conflicts peacefully.
So military strength isn't the only answer.
Nope. Negotiation and understanding are just as important. We need skilled diplomats who can build relationships, foster understanding, and find common ground. Solutions that benefit everyone, not just us.
Right. It's not about imposing our will on others.
And we have to recognize that military power has its limits. Force should always be a last resort, not the first option.
So choose your battles wisely.
Exactly. Not every problem can be solved with bombs and bullets. We need a balanced approach to national security, one that combines diplomacy, economic strength, and military power.
A full toolbox and knowing which tool to use for the job.
Right. And we can't forget about allies and partnerships. We can't do this alone. We need to work with other countries that share our values to address common challenges.
Strength in numbers, right? Having strong allies makes us more resilient in the face of all these complex threats.
Absolutely. We need to build strong alliances, foster cooperation, and present a united front to our adversaries. It's about shared values working together to promote peace, security, and prosperity around the world.
So it's not just about America, it's about the whole world.
Right. And a big part of that is economic strength. A strong economy is the foundation of a strong national defense.
Yeah, it's not all about tanks and missiles.
Exactly. It's also about jobs innovation and a thriving economy. Those things give us the resources to fund a strong military polities, to port our allies, and project power globally.
It's all connected.
And domestic unity is crucial too. A nation divided against itself can't stand.
Yeah, we need to address our internal divisions as well as external threats.
Exactly. We need to find ways to come together as Americans, focus on the things that unite us. Put country above party. We're all in this together.
It's about remembering that we're all on the same team.
Right. And ultimately, it all comes down to leadership. We need leaders who are visionary, who can inspire us and guide us through these difficult times.
It's not just about policies. It's about the people who make them. Their character, their integrity, their moral compass.
Right. We need leaders who are honest and competent, who have the courage to make tough decisions, and who put the nation's interests first. Leaders who serve the people, not themselves.
Leaders we could trust.
Exactly. It's about restoring faith in our institutions and believing that those in power are actually working for the good of the nation. And we need hope. We need to believe that a better future is possible, that we can overcome these challenges and build a more peaceful and prosperous world.
So it's not just about focusing on the negative. It's also about having a sense of optimism.
Yeah, believing in our ability to shape a better future. We need to have faith in human ingenuity and the resilience of the human spirit, and in our capacity to create a better world for ourselves and for generations to come.
Okay, so we're back, and we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
We've talked about those missed chances for peace, the brutal reality of this war in Ukraine, and how the whole global landscape is shifting.
And, all of that has huge implications for the United States, both at home and on the world stage.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier that the U.S. military might not be as ready as we think for a conflict with, a major power like Russia or China.
Right.
What are some of the things we need to do to make sure our military is ready for anything?
Well, one of the biggest issues is our over-reliance on technology. We've gotten so focused on having the latest and greatest gadgets that we've kind of neglected the basics of warfare.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, things like having well-trained troop sound tactics and the ability to adapt when things don't go according to plan.
It's like we put all our eggs in one basket and hope for the best.
Yeah, kinda. And the war in Ukraine has really shown the limits of that approach. Take drones, for example. They've been super effective, but they're not invincible. They can be countered, and their reliance on these complex communication networks makes them vulnerable.
So it's not just about having the best tech. It's about knowing how to use it even when things get messy.
Exactly. We need to train our troops to be adaptable, to think critically, and to operate in environments where communication might be down and GPS signals are jammed.
So back to basics.
Yeah, in a way, we need to focus on those core skills that have always been essential in warfare.
Okay, so we've talked about this reliance on technology. We've also talked about military readiness and the impact of this woke ideology in the military.
Right.
How do those things all fit into this bigger conversation about our military preparedness?
The human element in warfare is so important. You need a fighting force that's cohesive, where individuals trust each other and are willing to put their lives on the line for one another.
Like that Band of Brothers thing.
Exactly. That kind of bond is built on shared values, a sense of purpose, and a focus on the mission.
It's what makes a unit strong.
Right. But all this focus on identity politics, it's actually dividing people. It's creating these divisions within the ranks where people are more focused on their differences than on their shared goals.
Yeah, it's like trying to build a house with bricks that don't fit together.
We need to get back to a military culture that values merit and competence above everything else. We need leaders who are willing to make the tough calls, even if they're not popular. Leaders who are focused on winning wars, not on social experiments.
Back to that warrior ethos, mission first.
Right. And we've talked a lot about the military, but what about accountability and the government as a whole? I mean, how does that play into the challenges we're facing globally?
Yeah, that's a good point.
This lack of accountability is a huge problem, and it goes way beyond the Pentagon. We've seen it in all sorts of government agencies, incompetence, failure after failure, and yet nobody seems to be held responsible.
It's like there are no consequences for messing up.
Exactly, and that creates this culture of impunity. People become complacent, arrogant. It stifles innovation, and it lets mediocrity thrive.
So we need a system where people are actually held accountable for their actions.
Exactly. Reward competence, punish failure. That's how you restore faith in our institutions. That's how you make sure they're serving the people, not just protecting the powerful.
So where does the Trump administration fit into all of this? I mean, they've inherited a really complicated situation both at home and abroad.
They have. And the first step is acknowledging the reality of the situation. The world has changed. Clinging to outdated ideologies or wishful thinking isn't going to help.
So be realistic. Adapt to the new world.
Exactly. We need to rebuild our military strength, but we also need smart diplomacy. We need to build strong alliances with countries that share our values, and we need to focus on strengthening our economy.
A multi-pronged approach.
Right. We need a comprehensive strategy to address all these different challenges, and ultimately it comes down to leadership. We need leaders who are willing to make the tough choices, leaders who are guided by principle and who have the courage to challenge the status quo.
Leaders who can make America a force to be reckoned with again. A nation that stands for freedom, democracy, the rule of law.
Those are big goals, but they're achievable if we have the will to make them happen. So I guess the question for you, the listener, is what's resonated most with you during this deep dive? What are your biggest takeaways?
We've covered a lot, but the conversation doesn't end here. Keep thinking about these issues, talk to people, and really consider what it all means for you and for the future of our country. What are the most important lessons we can learn from all of this? How can we make sure history doesn't repeat itself? Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear.